Welcome to Resilience Development in Action, where strength meets strategy and courage to help you move forward. Each week, your host, Steve Bisson, a therapist with over 2 decades of experience in the first responder community, brings you powerful conversations about resilience, growth, and healing through trauma and grief. Whether you're navigating the complex journey of grief, processing trauma, or seeking to build resilience in high-stress environments, this podcast is your trusted companion. From first responders facing daily challenges, to emergency personnel managing critical situations, to leaders carrying the weight of difficult decisions, we're here to support your journey. Through authentic interviews, expert discussions, and real-world experiences, we dive deep into the heart of human resilience. We explore crucial topics like trauma recovery, grief processing, stress management, and emotional well-being. Our conversations bridge the gap between professional insight and practical application, offering you tools and strategies that work in the real world. Join us as we create a space where healing is possible, where grief finds understanding, and where resilience becomes your foundation for growth. This is Resilience Development in Action with Steve Bisson.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 206. If you haven't listened to episode 205, go back and listen to Charlie Powell talk about Healing Heroes, where it's going to be released theatrically soon. And yes, I am planning on going to Cancun. But for episode 206, we're going to talk to Cyndi Doyle. So someone I met through Facebook, and we had a great conversation there, and I wanted her to join us. She is the founder of Code for Couples. She has a great podcast. Go listen to it. She's a licensed professional counselor and a retired police spouse. She's author of Hold the Line, the essential guide to protecting your law enforcement relationship, as well as she has a unique voice that talks about the challenges faced by law enforcement families. She actually has that personal experience, which is even better. And we're going to talk about all that. So here is the interview. GetFree.ai. Yes, you've heard me talk about it previously in other episodes, but I'm going to talk about it again because GetFree.ai is just a great service. Imagine being able to pay attention to your clients all the time instead of writing notes and making sure that the note's going to sound good and how are you going to write that note and things like that. GetFree.ai liberates you from making sure that you're writing what the client is saying, because it is keeping track of what you're saying and will create, after the end of every session, a progress note. But it goes above and beyond that. Not only does it create a progress note, it also gives you suggestions for goals, gives you even a mental status if you've asked questions around that, as well as being able to write a letter for your client to know what you talked about. So that's the great thing. It saves me time, it saves me a lot of aggravation, and it just speeds up the progress note process so well. And for $99 a month, I know that that's nothing. That's worth my time. That's worth my money. You know, the best part of it too is that if you want to go and put in the code Steve50 when you get the service, at the checkout code is Steve50, you get $50 off your first month. And if you get a whole year, you save a whole 10% for the whole year. So again, Steve50 at checkout for getfree.ai will give you $50 off for the first month. And like I said, get a full year, get 10% off, get freed from writing notes, get freed from always scribbling while you're talking to a client, and just paying attention to your client so they win out, you win out, everybody wins. And I think that this is the greatest thing. And if you're up to a point where you got to change the treatment plan, well, the goals are generated for you. So getfree.ai, code Steve50 to save $50 on your first month. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 206. You know, with the rebranding, I really was looking for people who have a lot of experience with first responders, grief, trauma, and all that. And Cyndi Doyle, who has a great podcast called Code for Couples. And if you don't know what Code 4 means, you probably shouldn't be listening to this podcast. But the bottom line is I really liked her podcast. She reached out to me through Facebook after I asked, and I find her fascinating. And we had a great conversation right before we started. But Cyndi Doyle, welcome to Resilience Development in Action.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I love that you said, if you don't know what Code 4 means, you probably shouldn't be listening to the podcast. There's a
Well,
quick
my
little tidbit there. When I was thinking about naming the podcast, I was going through different uh, possible names with my husband, and I had said, "What about Code 3?" And he said, "I don't think you want couples to end up with things on fire, right? Like I'm like, yeah, but our relationships are a struggle." He's like, "Yeah, but I think you want to focus on what you want them to be, not where they possibly are." So I
yeah,
love that you said that.
you want to get to code 4. I think that's a great.
Yes.
But
Right.
anyway, no, I
We're gonna
love the name. And code 3 would have been a good name, but I don't know if and truthfully, your husband's absolutely right. Whoever
right.
he is, give him a lot of credit because I would be like code 3 for no, there's no way I'm listening to that crap. I already deal with that as a therapist. I don't want to deal with that on my podcast too.
Right. Right.
So,
Very much so.
but yeah, look, I looked up I do my research and I have no team, so it's me. Did my research, listen to your podcast, really, like for the record, you, if you've ever listened to my podcast, I never say something I don't mean. She is now in the like and subscribe button on my podcast list. So that's
Wow.
how
Thank
good
you.
it is. And then there's not like, if I don't say something like, hopefully you don't know me well, Cyndi, but I always say the truth. I don't like to lie to my audience because I think that's the shittiest thing you could ever do. But anyway, feel like I've known you, but I don't think my audience knows you yet. So how about you introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Cyndi Doyle. I am a licensed professional counselor in the DFW area. I have a group practice. I have been practicing for over 20 years, and I specialize in working with law enforcement, actually all first responders in my office, as well as first responder couples. Focusing on, I always say I focus on mental and emotional health. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Mental and relational health. I forget the relational part, and that's the most important part. So, emotional and relational health to keep couples connected and resilient. But also, it's really about our first responders remaining connected and resilient because there's so much research there that shows that relationships are a safety issue. So I kind of focus on that angle. I'm also, as you know now, a law enforcement spouse. He is retired after 21 plus years. Didn't make it to 22. I pushed him to try to do that. And he's like, I don't get any more money for doing that. So I was like, all right, peace out. Let's go. So he retired and has been retired for almost 4 years now. He's the reason why I jumped into doing what I do
Okay.
because I married him. And we could talk about that if you want, but married him and did not, neither one of us realized what we were going to be going through or how we would be impacted by what he did or what he saw on a regular basis. And our relationship struggled. And it was only in me kind of digging in and finding out what was underneath this that I started changing my relationship. And as I did that, I thought maybe I need to do more than just keep this with me or the people coming into my office. And so I started a podcast because, that's what everybody does is just starts a podcast for some random reason, right? So in 2017, I started the podcast and I have been really intermittent. I've tried to be much more
Deliberate.
consistent. Yes, consistent with it over the past 3 years, for sure. And then in 2020, because there was nothing else to do, ha 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 ha, I decided to write a book. And so I wrote the book, Hold the Line, How to Protect the Essential Guide to Protecting Your Law Enforcement Relationship. So
So
that's a little bit about me. And I do a lot of speaking and just came back from Orlando yesterday from speaking to NALI, which is the National Association of Women in Law Enforcement and Leadership Executives. So,
awesome. I
yeah.
thought you were going to say I spoke to Mickey and Minnie, but you know,
Didn't even have time. Flew in, spoke, flew out.
and then the other part too is when you said "Hold the Line," I just realized there's a Toto song called "Hold the Line."
Yeah. Yes, I get that a lot.
Yeah,
Hold the
but
line.
now if I like, I have a special effect board now, but I don't know how to put in a song. I would love to have to be able to put that. But too
Yeah.
late now. I think there's a lot of stuff that you said there that was really, really good because what you talked about is all the adaptation, the adapt. See, I'm having trouble. You adapt to your law enforcement
Hmm.
spouse because of what his life is, and or she, depending on
Yeah.
the individual. But there's also kind of like give or take. And so it's really hard to experience that kind of like change in the relationship, particularly when someone like retires. So I don't know where you want to go start talking about a little more about the relationship stuff. But I think that because of, weird scheduling, how it works and how there's compromise and sacrifices on both sides and all that stuff that goes on, there's a lot of grief and change in the relationship that occurs. So I don't know if you want to
Hmm.
talk a little more about that, but that's where I would go.
Yeah, I can just dive into kind of a little bit about my story and how I recognized that it was grief because it took me a while to figure that out and for us to kind of figure it out. I think, I'm just going to do the traditional girl thing in the sense that I think girls think, "Oh, we're getting married." People get married because they're like, "Oh, I'm going to have this partner and this partner's going to be there." And I'm going to be able to sit and have dinner with somebody, and I'm not going to be alone, and I'm going to have this partner that I'm going to be doing things with. And what we quickly realize is that it's almost like being married but single, but you're not really single either,
Right.
right? And so we wind up doing all this stuff alone. And in my relationship, when my husband started his career, he was doing 8-hour shifts. So that changed over the years, but 8-hour shifts, we looked at, there was a time period of about 5 years when we were ships passing in the night. And this was way back when. And so I would find things to fill my time. And for a while, that was scrapbooking. And I took a picture of him laying in bed and blew it up into an 8 by 10 because that was, and scrapbooked it because that was our relationship, was me during the day on a Saturday doing nothing, trying to keep my dogs quiet. I'd go run errands and things like that all by myself. He would get up around, I don't know, 2 or 3. I'd want to try to have a conversation with him, but he was tired, just waking up, blurry eyed, kind of focusing on what he needed to do for the day, going in. And I'd have him for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, but not really. And then he would go to work. And so there was like this 5 year period where we just really didn't see or talk to each other. And when we did, it was sound bites.
Right.
And so that's where I started getting irritated. He didn't really understand that I was getting mad about it because I wasn't showing it a whole lot. I didn't want him to know. I wanted to be the supportive spouse, right? I wanted to be like strong like him. So I didn't let him know a whole lot. I just sucked it up. I'm a Southern girl, so we put on our big girl panties and keep going and just didn't share. But I started shutting down. I was getting mad. I was really resentful. And that's how our distance kind of started.
Okay.
And then along the way, that's when I kind of figured out I took some time, clinician, look in the mirror, right? Kind of a thing. And I took some time to kind of figure out that it was grief. And there was a lot of layers of it there. And it wasn't until I started looking at that I was able to kind of change the narrative and change the story about our life and what it was going to be like.
I find it fascinating that you talked about grief because I see your point. But one of the things that I would say to you is I'm 100% sure someone in my audience is going to go, how is that grief? Because
Mm,
grief is only when people die. And
mm-mm.
so, and obviously I do have, people who will get a little more, and I'm not trying to put them down. But can you explain more as to why you consider it grief versus anything
Absolutely.
else?
Yeah. So when I thought about being married to this guy that I loved so much, I thought about the life that I would have with him. I thought about sitting down at the table and having dinner. I thought about going to events together and what that would be like. I thought about having vacations. I thought about all this way that my life would be, right? Because as we go along, we start developing a narrative. We start developing a story of what marriage is supposed to be like, or your relationship is supposed to be like. So as you develop this narrative and your brain has these, even when we're doing like just imagining what that story is, our brain is developing these neural pathways as far as what they are. And then when things don't happen, it causes a conflict. And I had to stop and look at what I thought it was going to be and feel sad about
Mhm.
not having that life that I thought I was going to have before I could move to the life that I did have. I hope that makes sense. So, as a spouse, it can be really weird because you show up at events and people are like, "Oh, are you really married? Why can't he get off work?" And, family life looks different. We weren't able to have children, but so many other first responder families have kids. And I don't think people have kids and think, gosh, I can't wait to be a solo parent while you're at work, right? So there's these aspects where we imagine what life is going to be like. And when it's not that way, we develop resentment and we have to grieve what we thought we were going to have before we can move into that acceptance.
And I think that to me that makes perfect sense because you talked. There's too many things you said that I really resonated. It's the narrative we created, right? I
Hmm.
mean, and if people don't believe in what narratives are, you put on this podcast expecting a certain thing. Did it occur or not? I don't know. But the narrative is,
Hmm.
oh, Cyndi and Steve are going to be the most interesting people I've ever met. To, oh my God, this is going to be so fucking boring about couples and is going to
Hmm.
blame the first responder, cop, whatever. Reality was going to be somewhere in between anyway. But the
Yeah.
narrative that we create in our lives about other people is absolutely where we get the anger, the sadness, the surprise, the disgust, and all those core. And then we take it out on our spouses or people we trust. And I put this in quotation marks for those in YouTube here, because yeah, we trust them, but we don't trust them enough to say, "Look, I'm feeling sad that we didn't get the life that I thought we would have." So I don't know if I got
Yes.
because you were saying I'm not sure it makes
That's
sense,
it.
but I want to make sure I kind of like translate it. And if I got it wrong, hey, correct me if you're wrong.
No, that's exactly it. And I can even give specific examples that probably everybody in your audience can resonate with.
Please.
Here's one, the one where you think you're going to go on vacation, and then, oh, by the way, the schedule gets switched, people quit, and now you have to pick up the shifts, and now vacation is canceled. Or we thought we were going to go on a date, and now we can't because this other third party in our relationship tends to have some influence.
Third party
There's
being
this.
the first responder life, just for the record.
Yes, the third party being the first responder life. It can even be the idea of hypervigilance coming home, right? So, hypervigilance coming home is this downside. And so, first responders at work, many times they're up and alive. At home, they are down and disconnected because their brain has to recover. My husband and I would want to have conversation with him because I hadn't seen him, right? So I'm the girl that he hits the door, and I'm like, oh my gosh, so how was your day? What are you doing? And I wanted to have this conversation about what his day was like. And what I would get initially, he was fine with it. Initially, he would talk to me about what happened, and then as the career went along, as you know, many times that career becomes same shit, different day.
Right.
He used to say, I'm the trash man, is what he would say. I'm cleaning up everybody's garbage and shit. And so I missed that. I'm like, well, no, couples talk about these things and we should have these conversations. And that downside of hypervigilance means that he's tired. And so if we don't know that that's the brain and that there needs to be recovery, then I can't understand and I can't grieve the fact of like, hey, this job has an impact. But as his spouse, if I understand and I can grieve what I think is supposed to happen, then I can make something else happen.
Right.
I I mean, he has grief too in the fact of like we would try to plan. We had this one pizza party planned one time and bought all the ingredients. We had something like 12 people coming over, six couples, I think. I had prepped all the pizza dough. He had wine pairings set up for all the courses we were going to do. And I think everybody was coming over at 5:30, and at 4 o'clock he got called in. And I'm like, well,
Right.
there goes that, right?
And I think there's so many things you brought up that made perfect sense to me. And when you mention that, it's like I've worked with detectives. And sometimes
Hmm.
when you're smaller departments, maybe not Dallas Fort Worth style, but smaller departments, there's usually one detective. And if the call comes in on your day off, well, we only have one detective. So yeah, pizza
That's it.
party or not, fuck you. You gotta go to your call. And that affects a whole lot of people. And there's a lot of grief and loss with that.
Yeah.
I think that that's one of the other things too, and people don't understand that. And this maybe I wish your husband was here, but you can maybe speak of this too. One of the things that I hear so often from my first responder world people is that I don't want to get home and tell you about the brain. Sorry, trigger warning. The brain splatter from someone who shot themselves in the head. I want to tell you about
Right.
that because that's like triggering for me. I don't want to trigger you and there's spouses that take that personally. You think I can't handle it, or you think you're stronger, and that it creates this big resentment that we talked
Hmm.
about earlier. But I don't know. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I found a lot with my guys and
Yeah,
gals and gals.
I
I'm not
agree.
wrong.
And at the beginning, he would share that with me. I do, I do trauma in my therapy room, so I'm like, I hear all kinds of stuff. It doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
impact me a whole lot. But there's things that he doesn't want to recount. And so I didn't know different stories. He would tell me some stories. And then I found out after he retired, actually, we were doing a podcast together about grief. And he started talking about how when he went to therapy to work through some of the incidences. And he starts talking about this incident. And I looked at him and I said, "You never told me about this." He said, I didn't want you to know everything. I didn't want you to have to think about and see everything that I saw. I wanted to protect you. And I didn't want to have to think about it myself. So there are stories that he shares. And then there's just gaps where I may not know. And that's also grief that he has a part of his world that I'll just never know.
Right.
And he does that to protect me, but at the same time, as a relationship, it's kind of sad. Like we can't share everything, or we don't choose to share everything. As a clinician, I definitely don't share everything that I hear as well. And working with first responders, I've heard some pretty gruesome stuff, but I'm not going to come home and tell him that.
I mean,
So it kind of goes both ways, but yeah, just because of our professions.
how do you deal with the resentment?
Oh, so
Because
once
that's what
I
it
kind of,
leads to, right? I mean, you can
right,
correct me if
right.
I'm wrong, but that's what it leads to.
No, that's where I got, and that's the catalyst for me deciding in my relationship that I needed to figure out what was going on and what was happening here because year 12, which seems to be a challenge for a lot of first responder relationships, by the way.
Interesting.
Year 12, year 13, I was having temper tantrums by myself. I was doing a lot of like flipping him off behind his back kind of a thing. I was really mad. I was resentful. It seemed like the department always came first, that kind of thing. And I was irritated, I think, because I didn't have a quote unquote normal life like my friends did. And so I blamed him a little bit as opposed to taking ownership and looking at my expectations. So it was only when I decided that I didn't want to leave the relationship, but I couldn't keep living the way I was living in the relationship and holding on to that anger. So it took me looking at myself and actually, I think, sitting in the therapy room one day and telling another couple, sometimes you have to stand in the other person's shoes because maybe there's something you don't get or understand. And I said that and I thought, hello, Cyndi, dumbass. Why aren't you doing that? You idiot.
Yeah.
Right. So that's when I thought maybe there's something I don't get or understand. And I remember writing out my anger and looking at why am I so stuck on wanting a life this way when I can have so much gratitude for the life that I do have. And so moving that to like grieving all these experiences that I thought we would have, grieving holidays together, that's a big one for our field of all the holidays like Christmases and oh, I'm getting emotional. Christmas and unwrapping gifts and what that would be like and our families getting together and this idea and this image and when I could let that go, I let the resentment go. And then I could have gratitude for all the other aspects of our life and really shift that around because I think in grief you have to, right? In grief you have to let go and you can't say why me or I wish, right? And so in bargaining with that or it's kind of learning to let that go and then moving to something else, integrating it. We can go into resilience conversation if you want. But it's that kind of a thing and moving it around.
Cyndi, I know I want to continue our conversation. We need to get back together at some point. You got to come back on because this is a great conversation. Because you talk about getting emotional. First of all, that's what I want from anyone who's on here because I want real
Mhm.
talk. I'm a Howard Stern guy. Let's not fake this conversation. Let's be real.
Right.
Um, I'm going to also start nicknaming you DA because you said you were a dumbass. So I
Oh,
figured I can nickname you DA. All joking
sure.
aside, I'm going to let you in on a secret about therapists. This is for the audience, not for you. What she just said happens to me at least every week, every other week. I'm saying advice to someone. I'm going, fuck, I should really follow that, huh? Um,
Yes.
so if you're a therapist and you don't admit to that, I'm sorry. I admit to it freely. I give my advice 95% of it. Either I've followed it or I want to follow it. So yeah, just we broke a wall here. So if you didn't want, just speed up 30 seconds and you won't have to hear it. Um, but I mean, I love that because I have those moments, and any therapist worth their while will admit to that, in my
Hmm.
opinion. And finally, you talked about gratitude. One of the things that I've learned in life is that, again, my audience knows I like to repeat this. My best friend died when I was 12 in a fire. So for me, I'm not always grateful, but I've learned that when I get upset or get into those quote negative emotions, I go into gratitude because gratitude will get me to where I need to be. And so I
Hmm.
think that when you talked about gratitude, it's great advice to give to couples, in my opinion, because you finding someone in this crazy world is already a fucking difficult thing. And now you
Hmm.
found them. So yeah, there's going to be some fights. It's not going to be all, butterflies and unicorns. It's going to be some difficult moments. And so that would be great advice to talk about gratitude. But do you have other recommendations for couples other than gratitude when they're talking about their couples and stuff like that?
I go back to the first one of like standing in each other's shoes. What is it that we don't understand? And I have a little bit of a story about that actually around the holidays, which is why it makes me emotional. I live in Dallas Fort Worth area, north. I actually live north of Dallas and Fort Worth and outside of Denton, Texas. And my parents live in Austin, which is about 3.5 hours away from me. It's where I grew up. And every holiday, every Christmas, my husband always had to work. His higher up always took off. And so it left him in charge. So, and he had to be on call. He was on call the last 7 years, 24/7. He was on call the last 7 years of his career. And so it made it really hard to go out of town or do anything because he had to make sure his call was covered. So many times he would say, "Can you?" He's like, "No, go do whatever you want to do. Go visit your parents, whatever." So at Christmas time, many times I would just go down to Austin because otherwise I'd be here by myself. I would always think about this is bullshit that every single holiday I I don't get him, right? I was kind of thinking about me like I'm alone. I don't have anybody to spend the holidays with. I would think about me a lot and how I was being impacted. And I came home from Christmas, probably Christmas afternoon. walked in the house, and he was sitting on the couch, and he says to me, "Please don't ever go away at Christmas again." And I was like, "Okay, why?" Little annoyed, by the way.
I
And he
get it.
said, "Because every Christmas Eve, I sit in my patrol car and I watch all the lights come on, and I think about how people are getting together and getting around a table and eating with their families and laughing and opening presents. And I feel so alone in that moment. And then I come home and the house is dark and you aren't here. And it just emphasizes again how I'm alone." And I thought, wow, I'm a real asshole because I never thought about that and what it might be like for him to come home alone on such a meaningful holiday. He grew up in a big family, and his holidays were full of his sisters and noisiness when they get together. They are a noisy Irish Italian family, if that explains any of that. And so to come home and to be dark and or even in the morning, right? And just nobody's there, it just emphasizes that. And that's when I started to realize that. So I would say perspective taking is one of the biggest things that we can do, is try to understand where the other person may be, even though they might not be verbalizing it. A lot of times we are reacting to our story or what we interpret is going on instead of thinking about what our partner is doing. That can help with resentment as well, that you're doing this together. You're not just doing it by yourself, hopefully.
Right.
Hopefully, you're both going through this together in a different way. So perspective taking is a big one. I think the other
Can I just
really
stop you
difficult,
for a second? Because I want to
yeah.
throw in another idea. You mentioned Austin, and one of my favorite authors is Brene Brown.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I love Brene. She's
Did
my
you know
my.
I'm certified in her work?
Oh, I didn't know that. Brene, like
Yeah.
the Dare to Lead part, or everything else.
The daring way and the rising strong part. Yeah.
Well, I joke around, and I'm going to lighten up the mood a little bit and bring it back up again.
Yeah.
I joke around with my girlfriend. She's my pass, and she's like, most people will choose like a hot, attractive actress. You got Brene Brown as your pass. I'm like, yep, that's my pass because I love Brene so much. Um, and her husband's name is Steve, so there's no
Uh-huh.
transition whatsoever. It's the same name.
There you go.
But I talked about the narrative, and I thought that was a great point. The narrative that he had was, you abandoned me on Christmas Eve and
Mm-hmm.
Christmas Day. And your
Mm-hmm.
narrative is, fuck him, I'm not fucking around my holiday because he's
Mm-hmm.
working. And when we
Mm-hmm.
think about the stories we tell ourselves, and that's my shout out to Brene Brown, that's
Yeah.
exactly where the issue occurs, is that we tell
Mm-hmm.
ourselves a story about something, and yet we never, like you say, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and the empathy, sorry to put in a little therapy here, but sitting in that empathy, and that is just amazingly, that's the best advice I heard, because I think that that's what I tell people when I get really angry. I tell myself, okay, what's the story I'm telling myself about this? And it
Mm-hmm.
so helps me to bring me back. I'm not 100% good at it, and there's no claim that I am. However, learning to get that narrative and thinking about the other person's narrative is so important. So I apologize for interrupting. I know you were going to give some other
No.
advice, but I thought that was important for me to name not only Brene Brown, who, if she ever listens to this, shout out, but love her, absolutely love her. And the narrative and the stories we tell ourselves is usually our biggest downfall in a couple and in relationships in general.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so important to look at that, because then when you get out of your own story, it can help with that grief that you're feeling, because it's like, oh, this can be a shared situation as opposed, and that really helped us. That helped the two of us to say like, man, there are aspects of this life that we chose together to be in this first responder world, and the fact that we're going through this together, and we can do this and resent it or we can do it and feel like, hey, we have some shared similar experiences. And that really helped us to let go, to move through the grief of the things that we have, the grief. And he'll talk about it in the sense that, he didn't get to spend time with me in the way he wanted to spend time with me. And that's one of his griefs. It's only now in retirement when now he has this medical stuff that happens because of, his career. And so he's not as healthy as he would have liked to have been. So we still go through those little griefs along the way. Yeah. So changing the story is a big part of it.
Yeah, you let go of a story you told yourself. You will open yourself to opportunities to listen to other people and hear their story and not personalize it. But again, that's a little bit of, again, CBT. So I do apologize for more therapy here. But we'll keep on trudging ahead. And the advice I give to some couples is don't don't hear someone, listen to them.
Mm,
Because sometimes it's a lot more important, especially in first responder world. We tend to hear, but we don't listen. And that's the advice I give to some of the spouses as well as the first responders. I'm like, he or she is telling you something.
hmm
Don't just hear, just listen and pay attention to what that does. Don't go with your gut reaction when they say, you abandoned me, because that's a harsh sentence. Let them finish the thought of what that means and listen to that conversation. So that's the other advice I have. I don't know if you have other advice, but
I'm just going to tag on to that one a little bit because I think many times we hear people's feelings and we take it personal, right? And so I think also first responders, that fight or flight aspect, it's automatic defense mechanism to like protect themselves because of the fight or flight. But it's I had somebody one time say, "Oh, I don't have to try it on for size. I just have to examine it." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." So I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I just have to look at that. I don't have to like try it on and see if it fits and where it pinches. And I don't like the way this fits, right? You don't have to try it on. You just have to look at the shirt and just go like, "Oh, I see that design on that. That's interesting." So that's one of my aspects of it.
right.
Weird, I know.
I look at crop tops and I don't really have to put them on to say that ain't for me. But anyway,
Right. I think the other advice I guess I would have for couples too is it just kind of along the same lines of that gratitude aspect that I would say it's like many times we have resentment for different aspects of what comes home. I can flat out admit that I didn't grow up with guns, but my husband carries one on a regular basis, right? And so I would think like, ugh, this is so ridiculous. You have to wear something with a belt because you've got to have a gun. This is so stupid. And like that kind of feeling would get in the way. And I don't know that I have necessarily grief around that, but I did have the resentment around it. And so, funny story, we were in Baltimore visiting, and I'm always like, "Do you have to carry?" And we're in Baltimore in the back of a cab, and I looked at him and I said, I kind of wish you were carrying right now. And he started laughing because I always give him a hard time, right?
that's
And
fucking funny.
so so there's these aspects where he will, because of who he is, he may say, do things to make me feel safer, or hey, you know what, you need to be paying attention. And I'll hear it as criticism as opposed to saying, oh, well, he's caring about me and doesn't want bad things to happen. Right now, even like with the carrying aspect, I look at it and I say, he wants me to be safe. He wants me to, he wants to be able to protect me. What would it be like if he wasn't able to protect me and we were out in public? He would live with guilt the rest of his life. So a lot of that is kind of spinning it around and having those conversations in that way. Yeah.
That's why Austin is all the liberals and the rest of the Texas is different. But anyway, that's just my little joke about Texas.
That's why we don't live in Austin, maybe.
Well, I look like I want to wrap it up here, but I definitely want to hear more from you. Like, I'm not, this is not a empty offer. Please come back if you want. I would love to have you
Oh,
back
I'd
on.
love to.
Because
Yeah,
this
sure.
is a great conversation. I feel like I'm cutting our audience short to a great conversation here. But how about you tell me more maybe about either your podcast, your book, or both, or whatever, and where people can get that?
Sure. Everything pretty much is Code for Couples. So you can find me on social at Code for Couples if you want that. I'll give you my LinkedIn stuff. It's a little bit more complicated. My podcast is literally Code for number 4 couples. And my website is the same thing, code4couples.com. My book is Hold the Line, the essential guide to protecting your law enforcement relationship. And you can find it on any online retailer.
Well, I'm going to be getting that book. I may send it to you and get it signed. The other joke I wanted to make is when you said code in the number 4, I was like, all right, Charlie, Oscar, Delta, Echo, and then I'm lost. So I'm like, screw it. I'm not doing it. And I've never pretended to be a first responder. I'm just a mental health guy. But truthfully, from the bottom of my heart, can't wait to have you back on, Cyndi. Please go listen to her podcast. I am a subscriber. This is absolutely true. I wish I could share that, but I definitely subscribe and I've listened to a few of the episodes. And I want to thank you for your time, Cyndi.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, that concludes episode 206. Again, Cyndi Doyle, thank you so much. And hopefully you join us for episode 207 with Elizabeth Eklund, and I hope to see you then.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.